Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Reality-Based Leadership Podcast. I'm here with Alex Dorr, our VP of People Evolution, and we are talking reality-based leadership. Hi, Alex. Good to see you.
Good to be back. Let's do this.
Let's do this. I like to think about what topics we should bring forward. Many times as I'm out keynoting and working with clients and employees, kind of like what are some of the relative hot topics out there? And that's where I kind of think of themes. I know you do that as well. And we come back and we're like, well, maybe if three of my 5 groups this week were talking about this, maybe that's something other people are thinking about. And so what I want to spend a few minutes on today really has to do with, excuse me, disruption proofing our businesses. And I think a lot of people are certainly sharing their suffering about we have so much disruption in our business. And I am like, but you are the ones also in charge of disruption proofing your business. This isn't just about, gosh, if only reality were perfect and it slowed down and it got calmer and we quit having the world change, we could get our arms around this. And I want all of you leaders to be really careful that you're not reinforcing the message that, you know what, let's work really hard and hopefully this will slow down, or maybe next year we'll have more of a, fewer disruptions. And I think why we're all getting so fatigued coming out of 2020 is we keep waiting for this place where the world's going to slow down and we're going to catch up. And it really defies our view of readiness and resilience in reality-based leadership. So I really wanted to talk about, if you want to disruption-proof your business, it's not even a 5-year strategy. It is 2 things. You focus on readiness, so you move away from change management. You focus on readiness, and then you really ensure that people understand resiliency and that they're not weaponizing it. And the sweet spot is the organization's working hard to build readiness. And what the organization lacks in readiness needs to be offset by willing resiliency. And as it's offset by resiliency, there's a lot of good feedback coming in that will fuel our readiness. And by the way, no one's a victim here. A lot of people think individually I have to be resilient because my organization didn't plan this. No, that's the strategy. No one's harming you here. The strategy is we will build up our readiness, and what we're not capable of in this moment, this is where you can have impact, your team can have impact. We need you to offset it with resiliency. But to do that, you have to really understand what readiness is and what resiliency is. And then you can start to see how you can disruption proof your business. So I'll stop there for a minute, Alex, for you to chime in before we get to some tips and techniques about how to do this.
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it's so funny you brought up this topic because I just had 2 sessions of this, I think in the last 2 weeks, where we really slowed down and went through readiness. So I was excited we brought it up. I think what we'll have to do is just do a quick, kind of define readiness for those that maybe haven't heard it, what's a little bit different about change management, and then resilience. And then we can talk about, I have a couple questions for you that I hear out there that play off our version that I think are a subtle way to be like, no, but I still want this old way of what we would call, change management when it's not working well. So maybe you go ahead with business readiness and some of those key differences, and I can hit on resilience or something.
So readiness is an approach to what we're going to face and greet coming our way in the world. And one of the things I think is so important as a core competency to get your whole team good at is welcoming what's new and releasing quickly what's old. It is attachment that causes so much of our suffering. And a lot of people are like, change is just by definition hard. And our research would suggest it's just not true. Change is hard for the unready. So if you want people to be disruption proof or teams, focus on readiness. But what we tend to do in change management is we focus on how can we make change least disruptive to our people? And that's not our role. Our role is how can our people keep themselves, and how can we help so that they can be delivered up ready, willing, and able to meet whatever comes their way, to say, thank you, can I have another? And so many of us are focused and emotionally blackmailed into doing change management, which is making change least disruptive to the people. Our job is to make change least disruptive to the business. And there's some key things we do that ensure that we're going to be thrown for a loop and change will be hard and disruption is going to hurt. And on the counterpart of that, if you want readiness, besides our whole model we have that we've written extensively about and talked about, I can judge a readiness of an organization based on a couple of things. And one is standardization, how good they are at standardization and how good people are, instead of trying to get fancy and clever and think of everything as a science fair project, how good they are at finding a good enough process and then complying 100%. So a disruption-proof organization is really standardized. There's a lot of scalability. There's a lot of people who don't need their preferences heard. In fact, resilient people are really good. They're not willful, they're willing. And a ready organization understands the difference between expertise and opinion. So opinion usually is used to stop the action. It's my preference. It's usually my limited experience. Opinions, the ego uses to keep me safe, to tell you why it won't work. Expertise is, tell me where you want to go, and I can tell you 10 ways to get there, and all of them have pluses and minuses. So it's depersonalized. Resilient people also depersonalize. So if you've got resilient people, they don't fear standardization. They don't get offended when somebody doesn't want their opinion, but does want their expertise. And it's all about ever evolving, evergreen. We don't have to find the perfect plan and then roll it out. We find a good enough idea and we all put our energy into figuring out how we could. And that gets us more information and we're continuously improving and like ever evolving. And so that really is readiness, like in a nutshell. But a lot of folks are using change management and their shared accountability is what they desire. But when a change comes, they throw shared accountability out. Leaders get over functioning, they get codependent. We expect very little of our people because they have us convinced change is hard. And whenever change comes their way, they have to suffer first before they can adapt and evolve and grow. So resilient people are evolved by their experiences, not traumatized by them. They're grown by their experience and they know they can emerge grown for the better and not like traumatized, that they just are able to impact the world, but also be impacted by the world. And their growth is very directed by what the world needs next and what their world needs next.
Yeah, love it. And with that, adding a few things that I just find fascinating, like in public health, the words preparedness. In the military, it's all readiness. Then as we look at a lot of businesses, it's like change management. It's like wait for it, then we get into the process of it. And it just, with how fast the world's going, it's backward thinking, not forward thinking. And I just find in some of my sessions, you nailed it. Like, how do we make change least disruptive to the business? There's like kind of a pause and a looking around there because everyone starts to think like, in all of my meetings around change, I am catering to the most resistant and thinking about, I don't want this to disrupt my people too much because it might be kind of harder out of their comfort zone. Like that is a big shift, even in one question right there. Like, what are we focused on here? And I find, I don't know if you put up that slide, there's like a lot of processing going on even on that one slide, because that's the shift. And it seems so subtle, but it changes everything you think about as you're going through change. And the other thing that you got me thinking is like in that standardization piece, I love the question, are we choosing preference over potential? Where I hear a good enough process, it's not illegal, immoral, unethical. It makes sense. It's in the name of efficiency. It's probably not the perfect one, but let's get moving on it. My name is yes. And I'll talk about 3 risks I see we need to mitigate, but I'm like in 3 weeks, you want me to try it 6 months? I'm going to be the best data point to say, we made it happen with that process. Here's clean data. Here's how we can do it better, faster, cheaper, safer, if you want that. Otherwise, I'll keep following the process. And that I find is so foreign to some groups right now, because we roll out a new process. Someone raises their hand. They're like, I'm top salesperson. I get that you want this to standardize everything, but are you talking about me here? Can I do it the old way I've always done it? And a lot of times we cater to that preference at the cost of potential of everyone actually following the process, because then we can see if it's a good process, we can improve it, we can use the analytics and AI and automatic follow-up to support the sales process. So I find that those two things you brought up are big shifts that sometimes we just breeze over, but those are, if you're not thinking about either of those two, we're going to be struggling with readiness.
that it's the work of the ego to try and have our preferences trump the business case. And the way we try and do self-preservation actually is self-endangerment. So in healthcare, when we rolled out overreads from computerized AI systems, it's actually solved a problem the radiologists were telling us they were concerned about, which was lack of overall consistency between different radiologists. And it was their fears around human error or human fatigue. Like they're sitting in a dark room looking at image and image and image. The phone rings, they're distracted for 1 minute and they missed it. Like it was out of the goodness of their hearts that they wanted a way to ensure that the quality of their work was better. So we brought in computerized overreads where they would read it first, but they were always being checked. And then it started to be pre-reads by computer. It was more accurate. It accomplished the goal they wanted. We had better patient outcomes. We were spotting cancer earlier, and they were furious. And it's like, but we're going to be replaced. And it's like, but what are the odds of you going to be replaced? What if the computer just allowed you to spend more time explaining results to the patient so that they knew exactly, like that's the real work to be done, is the patient counseling about, given these results, how can we help you make the best decisions possible? And so a lot of times people, not being able to get fluent in overreads would be the very thing that would make me replace them.
Is so powerful because that frees you up for the
Well,
high.
just could see 10 patients. The computer did do 50 reads for them. They're now seeing 60 patients, right? And they're fighting to still see 10. And then they're mad at me because I'm like, what's your biggest fear? And they're like, being replaced. I'm like, well, you're well on your way. Like this approach is, and I see that with, people with AI and stuff. It's like people that are willing to recognize that most things can be standardized. Like if you really get into it, I've really been into like nature and how we see the same patterns, whether it's how a leaf grows or how a shell grows, or like only humans believe that they are so super unique and the value we add is so fancy and clever, which is all the work of the ego. The value we can add is standardize everything we can get our hands on. So that frees us up to do the human things like compassion and curiosity and kindness, like the things that we're really lacking in the world. AI is trying to help us with.
Yeah, and I hear you, the higher level work, like that human to human communicating the results, like that's the one thing. It's going to be pretty hard for AI, and it's going to take a lot of humanistic weirdness to make that part be that the AI can add value. Now, it's probably down the road, but for right now, that is the next place to add value. And if that happens, there'll be another chance. But a little bit that's on trusting that you'll continuously grow your skill set, approach, willingness as an individual, that you believe in abundance and some of that. And Sai and I aren't saying there's no risk to AI and some things that people are working on as far as that, but some of that pattern is exactly right, that people fight standardization and it's like they're arguing against efficiency. And you added that layer that they're actually shooting themselves in the foot for the one thing they fear. So there's like so many layers to it, but the end goal of all, or the end point of all this, is it really screws up readiness, to go back to where we started.
And a lot of folks, if they would just say yes, and let me use my expertise to join the conversation in how we can best use something like AI, when they say no, their preference is no, that's wrong. The minute we start saying right and wrong, we get righteous, we stop learning, we stop growing. Somebody is the victim, we get polarized in our thinking, it's us versus them. Like it just gets down a path. And that's where I also think when it comes to resiliency, we've had so much out there on resiliency that it's about grit and it's about human perseverance. And sometimes it is about grit, but sometimes what looks like grit is just somebody's privilege. Like, they had a little bit more reserve because they didn't take 3 buses to work after getting 4 kids to school. Like, and so resiliency, we used to think it's like perseverance and stamina, and it's a little bit of grit and it's a little bit of perseverance. But what we know about resiliency isn't that. Resilient people have the largest network, sounds a lot like AI, have positive relationships, and they ask for help most often. But the most important thing we've learned about resiliency as of late is resiliency isn't me being the smartest person in the room. It's my ability to tap into the genius of the collective. And And we really are short-sighted and limited when we come up and think that a few of us are going to figure this out. It's like everything's figure outable and the solution's probably already out there. We just haven't crowdsourced this enough, or we haven't team sourced this enough, or we haven't used good enough methodology. And that's really, in an organization, people are mad when they have to be resilient, but that's really their role. I can't ready everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the organization is having a difficulty getting ready because they're responding to these minute situations that should just be met with resiliency. And I just had this great memory come to mind from a healthcare situation we were in. And at the time, there was a new drug that had come out, TPN, super expensive, hard to justify right away in rural hospitals, because once you crack it open, like, it's a big expense, a lot of operational issues. But my physicians came to me and they're like, we need to change our readiness in our stroke care in our emergency rooms, and we need to stock TPN. And so I'm working my butt off with the organization to figure out how we do that, how we train people. I'm working on readiness. I heard them. I'm not slacking. I'm going through evidence-based kind of practice about it. Somebody comes in with a stroke, and a physician didn't have the readiness that I, as their organization, should have given them. But he knew that this would be, for this type of stroke, like life-saving. You have what we call the golden hour to get this drug in the person. And I mean, it can be the difference about whether they're paralyzed or not. Big deal. Instead of being so mad at me that I hadn't figured that out yet, or the organization, he met that with resilience. He's like, we need this. We don't have this. He had his unit clerk start calling around, found out they had it at another hospital in the same city. And he said to the person, like, I'm going to send my clerk over. We need this. And the people at the other hospital, there are competitors, are like, it's expensive. We're not just giving this to you. And it's a controlled substance. And there's 100 things wrong with that. This guy took a picture on his phone of the patient, sent the clerk over with a personal check for $1,500 and said, go show them this patient until you know to our face, and here's the payment, and I will take the felony charge if it's a controlled substance. Like, talk about resiliency. They got the TPN. I don't want to go on record in case it is a felony. They got the TPN, they administered it. The patient had a fantastic outcome. That resiliency, talk about the best story ever for me to go to my administration and say, hey, I think we need to approve this. This is what our physicians are doing today with resiliency. They shouldn't have to, but this is what that physician did. So their resiliency was the very thing that created the platform for readiness. Now, he could have complained for 3 years that I didn't have TPN and we weren't ready, and that would not have sold the ability for us to get ready any more than his resilience. And so if we can lean in with resilience, I'm not talking heroics, we can lean in with resilience, we show credible witness to what could be possible. And resilience is what gives birth to what's possible. Then readiness can take what's possible and standardize it. And it is a constant cycle of organization does the best to provide readiness. What isn't available to us in readiness, we offset with resilience. We gather up the things we had to be resilient on and decide what makes sense to be ready next. And we've turned back towards each other in partnership instead of this blame game about how mad we are at each other, organizations and employees. And that's the call to greatness I would make to everybody is be the change you want to see in the world with your resilience, and then provide good information and good data and good partnership to help the organization enhance their readiness. Be a partner to it. Be willing to it.
That's such a cool story, Sai, and I haven't heard that one yet. So that was cool that just dropped out of somewhere for you, and perfect example. And it got me thinking. This is kind of gonna poke at some of it just to have some fun here. Is I've noticed, and this might not be directly correlated, but some people that really get kind of their recognition of heroics, diving catches, saving the day, kind of having this knowledge that they don't really pass on. They hoard their knowledge and then like kind of save it at the end. It's almost like then when you try and bring in structures like this, they fight to keep this like ability to be the bottleneck to get heroics. And it's like, it's a little bit what we said at the beginning, but this physician could have totally said like, yeah, I love doing these things so I can tell great stories at the bar after, but it's like that wasn't the case. And so I do see, not always, but there's this thing where it's like we try and improve these things. It would be like readiness standardization, but the person then fights the very thing that would get them out of having to use heroics and all these times. So that was my first point. And then
That's the connection to the ego, because
yeah,
the ego doesn't want to work itself out of a job. And if you're in higher self, you're glad to work yourself out of a job. And I don't want to make it that it was this guy like solo practicing. He was with his team around that patient, and they're like, what can we do? And somebody was like, if only we had TPN. And instead of being like, yeah, but administration hates us and we're behind the other hospital, they're like, who does have it? And what if we could get it? Like, they went through the cycle of see reality clearly and find their point of impact and then come up with next right action.
I
And
just see inside the box, like there's probably 100 constraints they're staring at to get the goal, and we're able to find even there's always just a little light. Inside the box, there's always something there. That's so cool.
On that path, because when he presented this, other physicians were like, doesn't it worry you that our hospital didn't have it, the other hospital did have it? And he was just such a great minded person. He's like, not even the point of the conversation, not even like, as we're working hard to incorporate this into our protocols, like, not even, nobody's the victim here, nobody's the villain. And what he did was he took that drama triangle of I'm the victim, we're being persecuted, and we should be rescued. And he just said, no way, there's an opportunity here. How can we be the co-creators? And he turned that drama triangle right on its head and just said, that isn't even the format, that's not even the framework that we need to think in.
I wanted to swim a little deeper into a thing that you said, and I'm going to mess up your words, that like the resilience is that's working on purpose. Like that part, you had to be resilient. Like I haven't heard it like that, and you don't want that all the time. But that resilience piece, people are like, well, if only circumstances got perfect, I'd be able to do my job better, but it's humans only add value in the imperfect circumstances, AKA if you're using your systems well, then there's that one-off weird thing that happens that you can, have that surprise and delight experience, or where you go above and beyond for the patient or the customer, or you do something unexpected that really builds your brand, or, you're with that. So it's like, I think a lot of us as I'm thinking individual contributor, but even as leaders, it's like all those times we're called to do something out of the ordinary. We're like, this just shouldn't happen. These circumstances are ridiculous, but that's the place we can add value as that safety net of resilience. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is don't shy away from that. That might be the place you can add the most value.
Like, a lot of people believe like I'm doing my job and I got inconvenienced by an imperfect reality, and now you're welcome, I'll give you the gift of my resilience. You're just not that downtrodden. Part of what you show up with is resilience. It's a core part of individual and team jobs. And people get so upset, which, if you are mad about having to be resilient, check your willingness, because your buy-in is so conditional. I'll buy in as long as I never have to be resilient, or I don't have to, handle imperfect situations. It is willingly showing up and tapping into the genius of the collective and making it happen in the moment, and then willingly using that great insight or information that we got to plug and play into bigger processes to make change and continuously improve. And it's all set with willingness. But the ego goes, well, if I do this for you, then you'll never change because you'll just count on me to do it every day. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is such a story. And so just think about quality of life. If, as I traveled, I expected all travel to go perfectly. So I have 6 flights over the course of 6 days, and my expectation is it should all go perfectly. And anytime I need to show up with resiliency, I am furious. And they're like, your plane's delayed, you're going to miss the connection. I'm like, this is not how life should be, and this is. Or if I just say, you know what, as someone who travels for a living, there it is. I'm not shocked by it. I'm not in chronic shock. Of course, there's a delay. I would expect that a few days this week, or even every day this week. And I'm going to meet that with resiliency. Now, after I problem solved all that, I will come back to my team as a willing participant and saying what I'm noticing as a trend is getting through customs in Dallas is really hard and Phoenix is easy. Can we route me through Phoenix? So I'm using what I responded to with resiliency to come back and process improve. And that's how it feeds each other. So then we're at a different level of readiness as the world changes. We pay more attention to how much time we've got laid over if I'm immigrating back into the country. So it's just dropping all our grudges and letting go of how we've been wronged by each other and really paying attention to our buy-in. But resiliency is part of your job, not in addition to your job. And by the way, resiliency is usually where you feel the most alive in your job because you had impact, you had new discovery, you tapped into the genius of the collective. So now you realize that you're surrounded by pretty cool people. It doesn't automatically lead to your burnout unless you take your resiliency and don't mine it for learning and just decide to be heroic. And there's a lot of heroes out there, but to me, if you're into heroics, that's a temper tantrum, not resiliency. Heroics are like, dang it, I have to do it. I'm the only one and I'm the smartest people in the room. And that's, to me, not resiliency. Resiliency is let's focus very quickly, given the circumstances, how we could in this moment do what we need to do. And then let's focus on what we do next to improve our readiness.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I with that the grudges and things. I'm seeing this connection to burnout, and it's probably obviously not direct, but I can see we're talking about the individual, but go to the organization. Like, what's the call for why this is so important? Besides everything you're saying, is I see where if you are developing readiness, and with some of our systems, we got our pyramid of business readiness, which is a great model that some of you have probably seen out there. But if you're building that in your systems in the organization, then that safety net is individual resilience. And almost if you can communicate that to your people that, yep, that was a moment where we had to tap into individual resilience. Thank you. Well, let's recognize that. But no, we have this individual or we have this organizational readiness to support you in more like downtime, so to speak. I know it's not that specific, but I feel like some industries, I'm thinking healthcare, when I was working, with the accounting, like CPAs, when it was really, busy, it always is, but definitely really bad for a while there. It's like it was all resilience. And there was not much of this talk about something like readiness that will support you once this, get through this phase. And so I know it's not exactly like that, but I see that without something to fall back on and knowing something like readiness is there, you're just like, when does my resilience stop? Every day looks like more resilience, more resilience, more resilience. I know the individual has a part to play in that, but I feel like that's something you communicate as a organization if you truly are working on it. Do you see that side at all, or see what I'm saying?
And I think it's more about the disconnection between accountability, our fourth factor, ends in continuous learning and mining our successes and failures. And if we've got resilience disconnected from readiness, then we're going to burn our people out. And so I think it's connecting back in. But what a lot of people don't do well is joyfully be resilient and then take what we learned from those moments that we had to be resilient, because that's an expensive way to do business and it burns people out, and mine those experiences to see where we had to people be resilient and how do we be ready. And then when we come back and say, here's standardization, which is a big part of readiness, and you're saying, I don't want to do that. We're like, well, we're worried that you'll have to meet this with resilience and you're going to burn out. And so when this came to the pandemic and I started, again, it was kind of unconsciously competent. I'm like, no, you guys, these are cycles that feed one another. We're together. We're not apart. It started really blowing people's minds because they're like, that makes so much sense. And to really blow people's mind, you as an individual, what you lack in readiness, a lot of times we save your life through resiliency. We also save your life through readiness. So you know that you should watch your cholesterol and either, take medication or eat differently or do something. You don't maintain a state of physical readiness. When you are in a restaurant, you have a heart attack, some poor soul who hasn't had training recently is going to use her resiliency to keep your heart beating until the ambulance can get there. And then we're going to plug you into a system that maintained readiness, that knows exactly what to do with heart attacks. Sometimes it doesn't go as planned, and there's some people on the team whose resiliency, um, you know, really like these things are to be as expected. And I want people to quit going through chronic shock syndrome. That's that they should be expected to do this. It is part of our role coming in. It's part of being emotionally inexpensive. Is being accountable, and resiliency is part of accountability. It's part of the way you're expected to add value.
Well, it reminds me if you just, the meeting after work, where it gets into BMW driving, I bet if you look at it in this lens side, it's like everyone's just sharing where they had to be resilient. The 4 times in the day that they had to be a little bit resilient, and it wasn't just the standard job. And if you just had to do your standard job, you'd just be bored. Like, so it's like, you just follow the process. So it's very interesting when you shape it that way. I know it's just a mindset shift, but I'm going to keep thinking more about that.
And my job after I was resilient, do I go in and bitch and moan and whine about it, or do I mine what I had to be resilient for and put it into the proper channels to have continuous improvement, improve the process? And so when I tell the story about, a nurse, there's a mistake in the medical record, and she reacted very self-righteously and called for heads to roll. And we asked her to toggle up with the question, what would great look like? That put her in a place of resiliency. And she went back in, changed that whole situation. Then we put her in a place of readiness, saying, can you work with us on this committee to help us, process improve this? And I always ask, who would you rather have part of the process improvement? The self-righteous nurse calling for your head to roll, or the really engaged, reflective, self-reflective nurse that is really concerned about patient safety? Well, I would take nurse number two. They're the same nurse, managed or led differently.
Yeah.
And so I think this is important because we have weaponized resiliency. We have a lot of people think resiliency is I have to be the smartest person in the room, and it's not. I have to know how to dial into the network of the smartest people in the world. And so there's so much about this that we are fighting for the wrong things, and we're not surrendering in the wrong places.
That resiliency piece, I know we're wrapping up and getting closer. We've gotten into a bunch is, I found the question, what's your one best tip to overcome this obstacle, challenge, business issue? And people love to give advice. So like LinkedIn, I have so many contacts that, college classmates that are in, finance or in this, and I have no idea what this thing's about, or it's, something like around leadership. I just like to push that out there. And LinkedIn, if you have a good network of relationships that you're interacting with, literally in an afternoon, you'll get like 8 ideas. And so some of that is like the simplest tool for resilience is to don't be scared to ask for help. Ask it in that sentence. What's your one best tip to overcome this obstacle? You literally get a download from experts that you're connected with, especially if you're in some of these like really amazing organizations. You have so many people that have so much knowledge, and it just shows up. And people love to give advice, and then it's our role to take action on it and clean up if it's bad advice. But watch for the judgment of bad. Like if it's illegal, immoral, obviously get it out of there. But we get to cherry pick with the ego. It's like that never worked. Tried that 5 years ago. But I found that's a way practically to fuel your resilience if you're looking for an RBL tool.
But a resiliency board, or we use a lot in our group, we call it team sourcing or crowdsourcing. But I just want to add on as we wrap up, the question is important. What's your best tip? Because if I ask for what should I do, or how can I solve this? People get into victimhood because they're like, I don't have an answer, but you shouldn't have to solve it, and the world is wrong, and this is really bad. But if you ask, I don't need you to solve it. Just like, what's your one good idea that you would have me, if I have a ball of yarn that's all knotted, like what's the next little thing to loosen? And when you ask people just for their tips, it's doable. And then you can work that list, and we call it resiliency boards as well. But I think that question is important because when you ask for the solution, people feel hopeless because they don't individually know the solution. And so then they complain and they get into opinions because they don't have expertise. But if you ask for a tip, then you get their expertise. And sometimes that expertise is, I don't know, but Rhonda Hackmore is an expert on this. Check out her stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so important that we come back and we stop putting unprocessed work out there to help people feel hopeless, and now it's unsolvable, it's unfigure-outable. We've got to get really intentional on how we ask things so that your tip, you get all these leads and then very figure-outable
Yeah.
and very solvable.
Oof, I can't wait. We love your response from this. We'll put out some clips on LinkedIn, but we love the conversation that starts after and what topics this can lead to. But Sai, anything to finish up here? I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
I love the topics of resiliency and moving away from weaponizing it to the individual instead of intentionally, when you're in a predicament, we ask you, what did you do to help? Or I ask myself, how can I help? We ask how we could. So it's a big difference for me in reality-based leadership on language. If we're talking about your immediate local impact, I'm asking you as an individual, what's your next right action? What could you do? Stop judging, start helping. But when we're talking about inventing the future, we change that language to how we could. How can we? And I think it's important because it's never, if you're trying to build readiness, it's never how could I? It's how could we? If you're building resilient, it's not how can I? It's how can we? In the world, that's how can I? How can I stop judging and start helping? And I think we overinflate our I a lot, and it's the ego's trick because we put our I out against the impossible, and then we go, see, it's not possible, I'm the victim. But if we put our we out against the impossible, it becomes possible. Is tuning in. We will be back with some more fire discussions. Let us know if you're enjoying this new format. Make sure you're subscribing so we aren't always consistent. We have day jobs as well. So we're not always consistent. Subscribe so you get alerts when we put another episode out there. If you don't have your team signed up for the newsletter, realitybasedleadership.com/newsletter, you are missing out. People ask me all the time how to sustain the learning. Connect with us on LinkedIn, follow and subscribe to our podcast, rate our podcast, because if you rate the podcast high, that puts it out there to more people. So if you want more people thinking like this, help us out and even rate that podcast. But everybody have a good week or two, and Alex and I will be back from the road with some more fire content.
Take care, everyone.